Have you ever noticed how much energy we spend explaining ourselves? We explain why we're late, why we said no, why we chose one path over another. We explain our decisions, our values, our boundaries, sometimes to people who have no business demanding an explanation. And often we think we're being polite, being professional, being respectful. But there's something quietly corrosive about this constant need to explain. Because here's the truth. When you stop explaining, people start respecting. It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? We're taught from an early age to justify ourselves, to be agreeable, to make others comfortable with our discomfort. But over time, we begin to realize something profound. Explaining isn't the same as leading. Explaining is about appeasing. Leading is about clarity. And clarity, not explanation, earns respect. A friend of mine once told me about a job interview he went to. He had been laid off 6 months earlier, and in every interview after that, he felt the need to explain the gap, explain the market, explain how hard he was trying. He said he walked into every room already trying to convince them he was worth something. And you know what? Nobody ever called him back. Then, one day, he decided to do something different. He stopped explaining. He walked into the room with calm, quiet confidence. When they asked about the gap, he simply said, that time helped me clarify the kind of work I want to do and the kind of place I want to do it in. Full stop. No justifications, no nervous laughter, no apology. And for the first time in 6 months, he got a call back, then an offer. Because here's what he learned. When you're clear, people feel it. When you're grounded, they lean in. And when you stop trying to make them understand you, they start respecting you. You see, over-explaining is often a sign of insecurity. We don't explain because others are confused. We explain because we are. We're trying to convince ourselves that we've made the right call. But conviction doesn't need validation. When you believe deeply in your why, you don't feel the need to justify the what or the how. Think about the people you admire most, the leaders, the mentors, the friends who seem unshakable. They don't walk around explaining themselves. They don't feel the need to rationalize every decision or defend every move. They are clear, not arrogant, just clear. And that clarity earns them respect. It's a kind of stillness, a kind of inner certainty that says, I know who I am, I know what I stand for. I'm okay if not everyone gets it, because that's the catch. Not everyone will. Not everyone will understand your choices. Not everyone will agree with your values. And if your goal is to be understood by everyone, you will spend your entire life explaining yourself to people who are not listening. But if your goal is to be respected, to be followed, to lead, not just others, but your own life, then at some point you have to stop explaining and start standing. Standing for something. Standing with integrity. Standing with boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks. They are how we protect what matters. And they are not an invitation for negotiation. You don't owe anyone a 10-slide presentation to justify why you said no. No is a full sentence. And when you say it with clarity, people might be surprised, but they'll respect you more than if you gave them a 5-minute justification laced with guilt. Respect grows in the space that explanation used to fill. It grows when we let go of the need to be liked and start focusing on being aligned. It grows when we speak with purpose instead of apology. It grows in silence, in that space where we don't rush to fill the air with reasons, just calm, just certainty, just enough. This doesn't mean you become cold, it doesn't mean you become inflexible, but it does mean that you become clear, and when you're clear, you don't chase approval, you attract alignment. And there's a story I love about a commander who was once asked why he didn't explain his decisions to the troops more often. He said, because when you explain too much, you make room for doubt, and in doubt, people hesitate. I don't need them to understand every reason, I need them to trust the mission. That's not control. That's leadership. You're not going to be for everyone. And that's the point. Trying to explain yourself to everyone is like shouting into the wind. It wears you out and moves nothing. But standing firm, speaking with clarity, that moves people. That inspires people. Some will walk away. That's okay. Some will misunderstand you. That's okay too. The ones who stay, the ones who lean in, they're not doing it because you convinced them. They're doing it because you inspired them. There's a difference. So the next time you find yourself drafting the long text or the over-apologetic email or the awkward justification, pause, ask yourself, am I being clear or am I begging to be understood? Because when you are clear, when you are grounded, when you are unapologetically aligned with your values, people might not always agree, but they'll feel it, and more often than not, they'll respect it. So stop explaining, start standing. Now watch what happens next. Every one of us at some point has stood in front of someone else, whether a boss, a friend, a partner, and felt the need to explain, to defend, to justify. And we do it because we think we have to, because we think clarity will come from more words, that if we can just say enough, they'll finally understand. But what if understanding isn't the goal? What if respect isn't earned by convincing people of our worth, but by knowing it ourselves? And we live in a world obsessed with explanation. We are taught to offer reasons for everything, why we made a decision, why we changed course, why we didn't pick up the phone, why we set a boundary, why we said no. But at some point, explanation starts to cost us more than it gives back. It becomes a transaction, a trade of our clarity for someone else's comfort. And in that trade, we lose something essential. We lose our edge, we lose our conviction, we lose time, we lose peace. When you stop explaining, people start respecting, not because they suddenly agree with you, but because they recognize something rare in you. They recognize self-trust. And trust, at its core, is what leadership is built on. You don't follow people because they explained everything well. You follow people because they know where they're going. Think about it. The most magnetic people in your life, the ones who seem to move with quiet confidence, aren't the ones who rush to explain themselves. They don't argue for your approval. They don't need to be understood by everyone. They are okay being misunderstood by some because they're not living to be liked. They're living to be aligned. And that's what respect is, alignment, not with what you do, but with why you do it. One of the most pivotal moments in my life came when I realized I was exhausting myself trying to make everyone comfortable with who I was. I wanted to be agreeable, easy to work with, easy to be around. And the price I paid was silence. I muted my instincts. I over-explained my boundaries. I edited myself into a version of me that was always digestible but never truly whole. And people didn't respect that version of me, not because they were unkind, but because I didn't. When I finally got tired of explaining, tired of shrinking, tired of convincing, I decided to try something new. I decided to just say what I meant. To say no without footnotes, to speak from clarity, not apology, to hold space without filling it with explanations. What I learned was this: the less I explained, the more people leaned in. They asked better questions. They listened more. They took me seriously, not because I was louder, but because I was clearer. Respect isn't built in explanation. It's built in presence. If when you walk into a room and you're centered in your values, people feel it. When you say no without guilt, people notice. When you lead without needing to be understood by everyone, the right people follow. That's the paradox. The more you try to explain yourself to be respected, the less respect you actually receive. Because respect doesn't come from others finally understanding you. It comes from you finally standing with yourself. There's a moment in every great leader's journey where they stop trying to prove they belong in the room. They stop trying to justify their choices to every critic. They stop diluting their message to be more acceptable. And that moment is when their leadership truly begins. Clarity is not harsh, it's not cold, it's not arrogant, it's honest, it's firm, it's rooted, and it's rare. We don't need more people who are good at explaining themselves. We need more people who are willing to be misunderstood for doing what's right. Let me say that again. We need more people willing to be misunderstood for doing what's right. Because if you're doing something new, something bold, something different, explanation will always fall short. You'll never explain enough to satisfy everyone. You'll always be too much for some, too little for others. And if you live to meet those expectations, you'll spend your life running in circles. But if you live from principle, from alignment, from the truth of who you are and why you do what you do, You don't need to explain. You just need to live it and let your actions speak the rest. This is not about shutting people out. It's not about being defensive. It's about knowing where you end and where others begin. It's about recognizing that your path is yours, that your voice has weight, that your decisions are valid even if no one claps for them. And it's about trusting that the people who are meant to walk with you will not need every step explained to them. They'll feel your direction, they'll see your intention, and they'll follow, not because you convinced them, but because you invited them into something clear. There's a line I once heard that stuck with me. A lion doesn't need to explain why it roars. That's not about ego. That's about identity. You don't need to argue for your existence. You don't need to justify your values. You don't need to make your no sound like a maybe just to make someone else feel okay. Say what you mean what you say. Let silence do the heavy lifting. And watch how people begin to respond to you differently, not because you've become louder, but because you've become certain. And certainty is what earns respect. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, pause, breathe, ask yourself, am I doing this to bring clarity or am I doing it to be accepted? Because the moment you stop explaining is often the moment people start paying attention. The moment you stop defending is the moment they start listening. And the moment you finally stand firm is the moment they start respecting what you've been trying to say all along. Stop explaining. Start standing. That's where the real respect lives. There's a shift that happens when you begin to trust yourself. A shift so subtle, it's almost invisible to the outside world, but once it happens, you feel it in every room you walk into. You speak a little less. You pause a little more. You no longer chase the need to be understood. You don't need to be right all the time. You just need to be real. And the moment that shift happens, when you stop explaining, you'll notice something else. People start respecting you. We think respect comes from being agreeable, from being accommodating, from always giving people reasons, justifications, backstories. We imagine that if we explain ourselves enough, why we said no, why we chose that job, why we walked away, they'll understand, they'll empathize, they'll accept us. But that's not how respect works. Respect doesn't come from over-explaining. It comes from being grounded. The people who are most respected are not always the most liked, they're not always the most charismatic, but they are consistent, they are rooted, and they don't explain themselves to earn respect. They move with clarity and let the respect follow. There's a danger in constantly explaining yourself. It seems harmless at first. You explain because you want to be clear. You explain because you want to be polite. You explain because you want others to feel okay. But over time, what starts as explanation becomes performance. You start playing a role that's not yours. And the more you explain, the less people actually listen. Because here's the paradox. When you constantly justify your decisions, it sends a message, not the message you think you're sending. The message people receive is that you're not sure, that you're looking for permission, that you need them to agree in order to move forward. But leadership isn't about getting people to agree. It's about being bold enough to move even if they don't. Clarity inspires, conviction attracts. And silence, intentional, confident silence can speak louder than the most eloquent explanation. A while back, I was mentoring a young professional, smart, talented, driven, but always explaining. Every decision she made, she followed with a paragraph. Every email she sent came with disclaimers. Every boundary she set came with a list of justifications. And she couldn't figure out why people weren't taking her seriously. So I asked her, what would happen if you said exactly what you mean and then just stopped talking? She laughed nervously, and then she tried it. She started saying no without adding because. She stopped padding her emails with apologies. She delivered her thoughts in meetings with calm confidence and let them land. The change was almost instant. She didn't just sound different, she felt different. And the people around her, they didn't just listen more, they leaned in. They started asking her opinion more. She hadn't changed her intelligence, she changed her energy. She had stopped asking for permission to stand in her own authority. There's a moment we all face when we realize that constantly explaining ourselves is actually a form of self-abandonment. We are giving people our clarity in exchange for their comfort. We are trying to be understood at the cost of being whole. But clarity is more powerful than agreement. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You need to be respected by the right ones. And the ones who truly respect you, they don't need a 10-minute explanation to accept your no. They don't need you to justify your peace, your pause, your pivot. They just need to feel the steadiness in how you speak, how you lead, how you live. When we stop explaining, we're not cutting people off, we're cutting through the noise. We're saying, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is where I stand. And then we stand there quietly, confidently, unapologetically. That's the kind of presence that shifts culture. That's the kind of clarity that moves organizations forward. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't beg to be followed, it earns it. Sometimes the reason we explain so much is because we don't want to be seen as rude. We don't want to be misunderstood. But here's the truth. You will be misunderstood. No matter how well you explain, people will interpret you through their own lens, their own wounds, their own fears. And if you're living to avoid being misunderstood, you'll never live freely. You'll always be editing. Respect doesn't come from explaining yourself better. It comes from knowing yourself deeper. And when you operate from that depth, when your decisions are aligned with something real, you don't need to convince anyone. Your energy speaks before you do. Your clarity creates gravity. People trust what feels anchored. And that's how movements start. That's how culture changes. Not through explanation, but through conviction. The best leaders aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who move the clearest. And clarity comes from one thing, alignment. When your actions, words, and values all line up, you don't have to talk people into trusting you. They just do. So the next time you're tempted to explain yourself, pause, ask yourself, am I being clear or am I trying to be accepted? If your answer is clarity, you don't need to say more. Let your actions follow your words. Let your energy match your message. Let your choices speak for themselves. Because when you stop explaining, something powerful happens. People don't just start respecting you, they start respecting themselves. They see in you a version of themselves they wish they had the courage to become. Clear, calm, direct, centered. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as a leader, as a friend, as a human, is to live so clearly that it gives other people permission to do the same. That's the ripple effect of standing firm. That's the quiet legacy of being unapologetically aligned. Stop explaining. Start embodying. That's where the real respect begins. We all want to be seen. That's at the core of it, isn't it? To be seen, heard, understood. And so we explain our choices, our values, our boundaries. We explain why we didn't show up, why we turned something down, why we walked away. We explain because we believe explanation leads to understanding, and that understanding leads to acceptance. But here's the question. What if you didn't need to be understood to be respected? What if every time you explained yourself, you were actually taking a small step away from your own center, trying to win over people who were never meant to walk your path? We live in a world that rewards clarity, yet most of us trade our clarity for comfort, other people's comfort. We soften our truth so it doesn't sting. We add disclaimers to our decisions. We pad our boundaries with backstory, hoping if we offer enough context, people won't push back, but they still do. And here's why. People don't respect what you explain, they respect what you embody. Think about it. When someone speaks from a place of quiet conviction, they don't need to elaborate. Their presence does the talking. Their tone is calm, their message is clear. You don't question whether they believe what they're saying, you just feel it. Now compare that to someone who is always explaining, always justifying, always trying to prove they're doing the right thing. It doesn't inspire confidence. It raises questions. Not about their intentions, but about their certainty. Explaining is not leadership. It's not clarity. It's not strength. It's a form of seeking approval, seeking permission, seeking belonging. But belonging doesn't come from being accepted by everyone. It comes from being aligned with yourself. I remember a moment early in my career, I had made a decision that I believed in, but it wasn't popular. And so I explained it. Then I explained it again. I spent hours having conversations that went nowhere, trying to get everyone on board, trying to make everyone feel okay. And all it did was drain me. Not a single person changed their mind because of my explanation. What changed everything was when I stopped talking, when I looked them in the eye and said, this is the decision, I understand if you disagree, but I'm moving forward. That moment shifted the energy in the room. Not because I raised my voice, not because I gave a compelling speech, but because I stopped asking for permission to stand in what I already knew was right. We think people need more information in order to respect us, but that's rarely the case. People don't respond to information. They respond to integrity, they respond to consistency, they respond to conviction. Every time you over-explain, you create space for doubt, not just in others, but in yourself. Because explaining over time becomes a habit, a way of second-guessing your own decisions before anyone else even has a chance to. And the more you do it, the more you chip away at your own sense of authority. So why do we do it? Why do we feel compelled to explain?